The sign moved slightly in the wind, not enough to make noise, just enough to draw the eye, just enough to make the moment feel longer than it should have. And as he stepped closer, he realized that what he was seeing was not just a scene, it was a message. Welcome to Story of the Black Past, where we uncover hidden stories, powerful truths, and forgotten moments from history. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from, your city, your country, and the time you are watching this. And if you have not subscribed yet, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Thank you for being here. Stay until the end, because this story will keep you thinking. You will not want to miss a single moment. Now relax, remove all distractions, and pay close attention as we begin. In the dry, open lands near the edges of Arizona, where the land stretched far and silence carried meaning, there lived a man called Elias, known as a rancher, known as someone who kept to himself, someone who did not seek trouble and expected the same in return. He had seen many things in that land: storms, loss, isolation. But nothing like this. The tree stood alone, not far from his boundary, not close enough to be his, but close enough to matter, and what hung from it changed everything. He did not move immediately, not because he did not understand, but because understanding takes a moment longer than expected. When what you see does not fit what you know, the sign was clear, not written in a careless way, not placed without intention. It carried weight, meaning, something meant to be seen, and something meant to be understood, but understood by who and why. Elias looked around. The land was still, too still, because moments like this do not exist alone. They are part of something larger, something hidden, something not yet clear. He stepped closer, carefully, not rushing, because rushing into something unknown creates risk. The ground showed signs, not obvious but present. Movement, more than one person. Not recent enough to see clearly, but not old enough to ignore. This had happened not long ago. And whoever had done it had left, with purpose, not in panic, not in haste, but with intention. Elias understood something immediately. This was not random. This was not chance. This was a message. But the message was not for him, at least not directly. And that made it more dangerous, because messages like this belong to conflict, to history, to something deeper than a single moment. He stepped back, not turning away, but widening his view, because understanding requires distance, as much as closeness. The name he did not know, but the origin he could guess. The land around him was not empty. It carried stories, conflicts, lines that were not always visible, but always present. And this was part of that. Elias returned to his ranch, not with answers, but with awareness, because he understood something clearly, that what he had seen would not end there. It would continue, in ways he could not yet see. The next day, he returned, not alone in thought, but still alone in presence, because some things you do not bring others into until you understand them yourself. The tree remained, the sign still moved, but something else had changed. The air, the feeling, the sense that what had been done was not finished, that something was still moving, still unfolding, still waiting. Elias looked again at the message, read it, not just as words, but as intention, and that intention raised one question, not who did this, but why now, because timing is never random, and whatever this was, it had begun. The truth did not reveal itself all at once. It came in pieces, in small details that did not seem connected at first, but when placed together, began to form something deeper, something that reached beyond a single moment, beyond a single act. Elias did not return to the tree immediately the next time. He changed his approach, moving wider across the land, studying the area from distance, because what he had seen was not isolated. It was part of something, and to understand something you must see more than its center. He followed the ground carefully, not just near the tree but outward, looking for where movement began, where it ended, because people do not appear without direction. They come from somewhere, and they leave towards something. The tracks were faint, not careless. Whoever had moved there knew the land, knew how to walk without leaving clear signs. But not everything can be hidden, not completely. A broken branch, a disturbed patch of soil, small things, easy to miss, unless you are looking for them. Elias moved slowly, piece by piece, until he found something that did not belong. A cloth, not torn by accident, but dropped, left behind, and it told him something. Not fully, but enough. Enough to know that the girl had not been alone. Enough to know that what had happened was not simple. He carried it back with him, not as proof, but as connection, because every small detail builds a larger picture. That night, he did not sleep easily, not from fear, but from thought, because what he had seen, what he had begun to understand, did not fit into a simple story. It pointed to something else, something organized, something deliberate. The next morning, he made a decision, not to ignore it, not to leave it, because ignoring something like that does not make it disappear. It only allows it to continue. He returned again, closer this time, more direct. The tree stood unchanged, but the space around it did not feel the same. There was presence, not visible, but felt, the kind that comes when something has been watched, when something has been revisited. And that meant one thing: he was not the only one returning. Elias did not call out, did not announce himself, because announcing yourself in a space like that is not strength, it is exposure. Instead, he listened, waited, because silence reveals more than noise. After some time, he heard it, movement, light, controlled, not approaching directly but circling, observing, the same way he had been, and that told him something important. Whoever was out there was not careless, was not afraid, and was not alone. Elias stepped back, not retreating, but adjusting, because confrontation without understanding leads to failure. The movement stopped, as if responding to his shift, as if watching him. The space held, heavy, still, until finally, a figure appeared, not rushing, not hiding, but stepping into view carefully, deliberately, and in that moment, everything became clearer, not fully, but enough, because the presence confirmed what he had suspected. This was not an isolated act. This was part of something connected to the land, to the past, to a message that had not yet been answered. The figure did not speak immediately, and neither did Elias, because both understood something, that words would change everything, and once spoken, could not be taken back. The silence stretched, not empty, but full, until one truth settled between them. This was not about what had happened, it was about what it meant, and whatever it meant was not finished. The history did not come as a story told in full, it came in fragments, in pauses, in the space between words, because some truths are not given easily. They are carried, protected, revealed only when necessary. The figure who had stepped forward did not look at Elias as a stranger, but not as an ally either. There was caution, but also recognition, the kind that comes from knowing the land, from understanding who belongs and who does not. When the voice finally came, it was low, controlled, not emotional, but heavy with meaning. And what was said did not explain everything, but it opened the door to something much larger than Elias had expected. The girl had not been alone, she had not been lost, she had been part of a movement, a crossing, a quiet attempt to move through land that no longer felt safe, and that was where the danger began. The land around Arizona was not empty, not truly. It carried lines that had been drawn without agreement, lines that divided people, controlled movement, created tension that did not always show itself openly, but was always present. Those lines had been crossed, not in open challenge, but in quiet movement. And someone had chosen to respond, not with warning, but with a message. The sign was not random. It was meant to be seen, meant to be read, meant to travel beyond that single tree, because messages like that are not for one person, they are for everyone. Elias listened, carefully, because what he was hearing was not just about the girl, it was about conflict, about control, about something that had been building long before he had seen the tree. The figure spoke of tension, of people moving at night, of others watching, of decisions made in shadows, because when land becomes divided, what happens in the open is not always the full truth. The girl had been caught in that space, between movement, between control, between two sides, neither fully safe, and that made what had happened something else, not just an act, but a signal, a warning, a statement. Elias understood then why the moment had felt wrong, why the silence around the tree had carried weight, because it was not just about what had happened, it was about what would follow, and what would follow would not stay contained. The figure did not give names, did not point directly, because speaking too clearly creates risk. But the meaning was enough for Elias to understand that this was not something he could ignore, not anymore, because he had seen it, because he had stepped into it, because he now knew that something was moving beneath the surface of the land he lived on, something that would not stop unless it was faced. The figure stepped back after speaking, not waiting for a response, not asking for agreement, because the truth had already been given, and what Elias chose to do with it was now his decision. The silence returned, but it was not the same silence as before. It was heavier, more defined, because now it carried understanding. Elias stood alone again, but not the same as before, because he had crossed a line, not physically, but in knowledge, and once you understand something like that, you cannot return to not knowing. He looked once more toward the tree, toward the sign, and the meaning behind it, and one truth became clear. This was not over, not even close, because messages like that do not end with being seen. They begin, and whatever had begun would reach further than he had first believed. The moment Elias chose to step further was not loud. It was not marked by a clear decision spoken out. It came quietly, through understanding, through the realization that doing nothing would not return things to how they were, because what he had seen had already changed everything. He did not rush into action. He did not go looking blindly, because moving without direction in something like this leads to being lost. Instead, he returned to what he knew: observation, patience. The same way he had learned the land, he would now learn the conflict within it. He began to move beyond his usual boundaries, not far enough to be noticed immediately, but far enough to see more, to understand where tension lived, where movement happened at times it should not. The land around Arizona felt different now, not in appearance, but in presence, in the sense that something was happening beneath the surface, something that could not be seen from a distance, but could be felt when you paid attention. He noticed patterns, not of animals, not of weather, but of people, movement at night, lights where there should be none, voices carried quietly across distances, because whatever had placed that message was still active, still watching, still deciding. Elias followed one such pattern carefully, not directly, not in a straight line, but in a way that allowed him to see without being seen, because he understood now that those involved were not careless. They moved with purpose, with knowledge of the land. He reached a point where the land shifted slightly, where the ground told a different story. More tracks, more movement, not random, not scattered, but organized. That was when he understood. This was not a single group, not just one side. There were multiple forces watching each other, moving around each other, each believing they held control, each unwilling to give it, and in that space, people like the girl became vulnerable. Elias stayed hidden, still, watching, as figures moved through the distance, not openly, not in daylight, but in the edges of visibility, and that told him everything he needed to know. This was active, ongoing, and dangerous, more dangerous than he had first thought, because once multiple sides are involved, there is no simple outcome, only escalation. He stepped back, carefully, not revealing himself, because being seen would place him inside it, fully, without preparation, And he was not ready for that. Not yet. But even stepping back did not remove him from it. Because knowledge is its own kind of involvement. He returned to his ranch, but it no longer felt separate, no longer felt outside of what was happening, because now he understood. The lines had shifted, and his land was no longer just his. It was part of something larger. The next sign came not at the tree, but closer, a mark, small, deliberate, placed where it would be seen, not by everyone, but by him. And that meant something. It meant he had been noticed, not directly, not confronted, but marked, as someone aware, as someone who had seen. And that was a turning point, because now he was no longer just an observer. He was part of the pattern, part of the movement, part of the decision, and that realization carried risk, because being seen in something like this means you must choose, not later, but soon, whether to step back completely or step forward, knowing the cost. Elias stood with that understanding, with that weight, and for the first time, he felt something different, not fear, but clarity. Because the moment had arrived where watching would no longer be enough. The choice did not come from impulse, it came from understanding, from the realization that remaining in the middle, neither stepping away nor stepping forward, would only make him vulnerable. Because in a conflict like this, being undecided is more dangerous than choosing a side. Elias did not rush to confront anyone directly. He prepared, not for conflict but for clarity, because he understood something important, that stepping forward without understanding fully leads to becoming part of the problem, not the solution. He returned to the tree one last time, not to look again, but to stand in the place where everything had begun. Because beginnings often hold answers, the sign still moved slightly in the wind. But its meaning had changed. At first, it had been a message he did not understand. Now, it was a warning he fully recognized, not directed at one person, but at anyone who chose to act without thought. Elias stood there, still, long enough to be seen, because this time he was not hiding, he was choosing to be present. And presence draws response. It did not take long. The movement returned, not hidden, not distant, but closer, more direct. Because now, they knew he was not just watching, he was waiting. The same figure stepped forward again, but not alone this time. Others remained behind, unseen, but present. The air held tension, not of immediate conflict, but of decision, because both sides understood something. This moment would determine what came next. Elias did not speak first, because speaking too quickly closes paths. Instead, he waited, allowed the silence to settle, to define the space. When the voice came, it was different this time, less guarded, more direct, because there was no longer a need to hide meaning. The message had been seen, understood, and now it was being answered. Elias did not argue, did not challenge, because he knew this was not a moment for force. It was a moment for truth. He spoke clearly, not loudly, but firmly, about what he had seen, what he understood, what he would not allow to continue near his land, because silence, at this point, would be acceptance, and he would not accept it. The figures listened, not interrupting, not reacting immediately, because they too were measuring not just his words, but his position, his intention, his understanding. The space held, heavy, until one truth became clear. Elias was no longer neutral. He had stepped forward, not into their side, not into the other, but into a line of his own, a boundary defined not by control, but by refusal. Refusal to allow what had happened to continue unchecked, and that changed everything, because in a conflict like this, a new line forces adjustment. The figures did not threaten him, did not move against him, because they understood something, that he understood the land, that he was not acting blindly, that he was not weak, and that made direct conflict uncertain. Instead, they stepped back, not in defeat but in decision, because sometimes the strongest move is not forward but away. The tension eased, not fully, but enough to shift the moment, enough to end what could have become something worse. Elias remained standing until the space cleared, because leaving too soon breaks control, and he did not break control, not now, not after everything. The conflict did not end that day, but it changed. The lines moved, the actions slowed. The message had been answered, not with force, but with presence, and that presence created something new. A boundary that had not existed before, one that would shape what came next. The consequences did not arrive all at once. They unfolded slowly, in changes that were not always visible at first, but became clear over time, because when a line is drawn with intention, it reshapes everything around it. The land around Arizona did not become peaceful overnight. It did not lose its tension completely, but something important had shifted, something that could not be ignored by those who moved within it. The movements at night became less frequent, not gone, but reduced, because the presence Elias had created now existed as part of the space, something to consider, something to account for, something that altered decisions before they were made. Those who once moved freely began to adjust. Paths changed, timings shifted, because where there is uncertainty, there is hesitation, and hesitation changes outcomes. The tree remained untouched. No new signs appeared, no new messages were left, because the one that had been placed there had already done its work. It had been seen, understood, and answered. Elias continued his life as he had before on the surface, tending to his land, maintaining his routine, moving through each day without drawing attention to what had happened, because he understood that maintaining normalcy was what kept the balance steady. But inside, everything was different, because he now carried knowledge of something deeper than the land itself, something that moved within it, something that required awareness, not just of the visible world, but of what existed beneath it. The people who had once remained hidden did not disappear, but they became more careful, more deliberate, because now they knew there was someone who saw, someone who understood enough to act if necessary. And that knowledge limited them. The land began to take on a new role, not formally, not declared, but understood, a space where movements slowed, where actions were considered, where decisions were made with more thought. It became something close to neutral, not controlled by one side, not owned by another, but respected, and respect is what prevents conflict. The story of what had happened did not spread in clear words, it did not travel far as a complete account, but it existed in fragments, in quiet mentions, in the way people referred to that area with a certain tone, a certain caution. Elias's name was not spoken loudly, not turned into something larger than he was, but it was known, quietly, as someone who had stood in a moment that could have become something worse and had changed it without force, without escalation, just by being present, and that presence was enough. Time passed, seasons changed, the sharpness of the moment softened, but the effect remained, because it had settled into behavior, into habit, into the way people moved through that space. The conflict did not disappear from the world, but it did not take hold there again, and that was what mattered. Elias continued to live on his land, not as someone outside of the world's tension, but as someone who understood it, who had seen it, who had chosen a path within it that did not add to its destruction. And that choice stayed, not as something spoken, but as something lived, because the strongest changes are not always the ones that are seen. They are the ones that remain, quietly, over time, shaping everything that comes after. In the end, the story did not become something loudly told across towns or written into records for all to see. It settled into something quieter, something deeper, something carried in memory, in behavior, in the way people changed without always knowing why. The land remained as it had always been in form, open, wide, silent. But its meaning had changed, because once a place becomes known for something beyond what can be seen, it never fully returns to being ordinary again. Those who moved through that area did so differently now, not out of fear alone, but out of awareness, out of the understanding that something had happened there, something that had shifted the balance in a way that could not be easily undone. The tree still stood, the wind still moved through it. But the moment it once held remained, not visible but present. Elias continued his life without seeking recognition, without telling the story, without turning what had happened into something to be repeated, because he understood something important, that not all actions need to be spoken, some are meant to exist as they are. He worked his land, moved through his days, lived within the same quiet routine. But everything around him had changed, not in structure, but in perception, because those who had once moved without thought, now thought before moving. Those who had once acted without hesitation, now paused, and that pause was the difference. Time moved forward, as it always does. People came and went, details faded, but the effect remained, because it had settled into the way things were done, into the decisions made in silence, into the choices made before action. And that is how stories like this survive. Not through loud telling, not through perfect memory, but through impact, through the way they shape what comes after. So when you think about this story, do not only think about the tree, do not only think about the sign, think about what it reveals, what it teaches, what it shows about understanding, about patience, about the ability to stand in a moment and choose a path that does not add to destruction, but changes its direction. Because that is where the real story lives, not just in what happened, but in what it changed. Thank you for watching Story of the Black Past. If you stayed until this moment, I truly appreciate you. Tell me where you are watching from, your city, your country, and the time. And if you have not subscribed yet, take a moment to like and subscribe, because there are many more stories like this, stories that uncover what has been hidden, stories that show strength, not always through force, but through understanding. And remember this, not every battle is fought with noise, not every victory is seen, but when you stand with clarity, when you act with purpose, when you understand what is at stake, you can change the course of something greater without ever raising your voice, and sometimes that is the strongest thing of all.